Got to ask the question now. I feel like we have sensitively covered the Coyotes and their current state, but there is no debate that the Coyotes are the most embarrassing and poorly run franchise in all of the National Hockey League. They will get a clean slate if they move to Salt Lake City and change ownership. So that begs the question, who takes over and becomes the most embarrassing and kind of depressing franchise in the National Hockey League?
This is a franchise and a roster, famously, that I love. It has to be the Columbus Blue Jackets, just because they have not... Since doing something incredible, I'm going to sing the praise of the Blue Jackets because I like this conversation, but I don't think that there is like one, oh my God, disgusting, what is wrong with them? Like the way that honestly people used to talk about the Oilers. Like that I don't think that there is a franchise that is that level of like low and defeated and lost right now. But given the calendar year the Blue Jackets have had, and given that since doing the incredible thing they did against the Lightning in 2019, it has mostly been kind of crashing into walls. I think the answer is the Blue Jackets, but I say that with all the love in my heart for the Blue Jackets and riding for them and saying in a couple of years, I think they're going to be really good.
Yeah, it's hard to say that it's recency bias with the Blue Jackets because they have the lowest winning percentage in all of American professional sports, like the big four sports leagues. And they definitely don't have a rich history. So I definitely think there's a case to be made there. But I also look at like the Blue Jackets did have one of like the biggest playoff upsets in NHL history by knocking out the Lightning in 4 games a handful of years ago. So it's not like there isn't any team success there. It's kind of a lack of direction, but their future is bright and they've got a good market. Like their building is great, despite the fact that they haven't had many good teams. Their fan base is incredible. I really like the city of Columbus as a hockey market. So I think that the Blue Jackets aren't necessarily like the clear cut. I would throw the Sabres into the ring, and I know that they've got a lot of talent right now, and they're one of those teams that's kind of waiting to turn the corner too. But they've got the longest playoff drought. We saw an amazing stat this week that literally every team in the entire NHL, the other 31 organizations, have played double-digit playoff games since the Sabres last made the playoffs. And that's crazy because the Seattle Kraken are like 2 years old.
Yeah, shout out the Kraken. That's the biggest takeaway there.
That's crazy, but double-digit playoff games since the last time the Sabres made the playoffs. And it's not just the playoff drought thing. It's, I think, like their building is a little old. The vibes around Buffalo are tough. The Jack Eichel thing really flamed out. You've got Leafs fans taking over that building being empty, a real like hatred towards ownership. I think like the general vibes combined with the playoff drought of the Sabres make them probably the lowest on the totem pole in my mind.
Here's the Sabres' biggest problem in my mind. They are at risk of being the team that is middling and just out of the playoffs for 100 years in a row. Because there have been teams...
No man's land.
Yes, exactly. And that's such a shitty, horrible place to be if you're in the NHL.
But I don't know if I would put them there just because they have so much untapped potential on that roster. Like it's not like they're middling and they're hanging around because they're incapable of putting together a really good roster. I think that a lot of their problems get fixed if you get better / more leadership. And that is on the roster, that's behind the bench. This Sabres team, I think, is relatively easily fixable.
Sabres need to trade for Nick Foligno.
They
could use
a Nick Foligno type.
You know what's awesome about Nick Foligno, by the way? He had fucking monster years. I think that people see Nick Foligno now as like the veteran and the leader and the old guy and everything. He was like one of the best players in the NHL.
You know who would be fucking cool in Buffalo?
Give it to me.
Pending free agent. Steven Stamkos.
Oh, yeah. And it's like you get to do Toronto without having to go to Toronto?
Exactly. Like, that was the big thing. Stamkos from Toronto. That's as close as you can get without playing for the Maple Leafs.
Red Wings?
No. Buffalo's closer to Toronto.
Buffalo?
They're literally on
Buffalo's
other sides of the waterfall.
Yeah.
So, like, Stamkos to Buffalo would be very cool. I think it's probably more likely he goes to Chicago or something like that. But would be cool. Another team that I would throw into that ring, too, is the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, Senators are, but like, I don't want to say like nobody cares about the Senators, but they don't have, like, people, they aren't as top of mind for a lot of North American sports fans. So that, like, each team has things that make them, that put them in the conversation, and the Senators are at risk of being unexciting for a very long time.
There aren't a lot of jokes for the Senators.
Yeah.
Like there were at
Cap
one point in
jokes,
time.
Uber jokes.
Yeah, like ownership. Now that it's in Andlauer's hands, I think it's not a fully clean slate, but I think there are fewer jokes because there's more unknown for the future.
I took a peek at the chat and someone threw out the Sharks. A lot of people did. I thought about the Sharks for a second, and I say no because they haven't really had the chance yet to build what they're trying to build. Somebody mentioned like the Hurdle trade should cement it. The Hurdle trade is good.
Yeah,
they should have done the Hurdle trade. It's crazy. It was shocking. You ask yourself, like, do you really want to be retaining money for that long? But a GM trading away a huge ass contract that he didn't sign, I actually think is good business.
The fact that they've been able to trade both Erik Karlsson and Tomas Hertl is kind of wild, but I think there are two sides of that conversation where it's like you shouldn't have given Tomas Hertl that bag
but
to
they
begin
didn't.
with.
Yeah.
Well, not the current leadership, but if we're having this conversation, it's the big picture. But like the Sharks also had an incredible roster and I know they didn't win, but they were a Western Conference powerhouse for a long time. And just because they're currently in a rebuild doesn't mean that they are embarrassing.
That's a perfect way of putting it. There are teams that are bad right now. That doesn't mean that they're like the team that you look at and say, oh God, when are they going to get out of it? But even with the Blue Jackets, I think that can turn quickly because they have a lot of good young players. They're going to be a team that I think with more leadership, no offense to Captain Boone Jenner and Zach Werenski and those guys, but I think you get a couple of more been there, done that guys, and the young players will follow suit. And that, like, I see futures for all the current rosters, except really the Senators. I'm kind of meh on the Senators to say they can do something. They can become something. And that includes the Sabres.
Yeah. And the important thing here is that none of these teams are even close to being in a tier that the Arizona Coyotes were in, because the Coyotes were completely in a league of their own in terms of their ineptitude, both on the ice and from an organizational standpoint. I hate to say it, but like the Coyotes are like a fucking disaster. Maybe one of the worst run organizations in all of sports, not just hockey.
My overall answer though is just that, like, I'm not too low on any franchise or team.
That's what I'm saying. There's a path out for all of these teams.
We all silly like the mayor.